We're looking at compound inequalities today, and before we start, we're going to make a note at the top about what a compound inequality actually is. And if you see that word compound, all that means is we're looking at problems that have two inequalities in one. And I'm going to say it's two inequalities that are joined by and or the word or. So it's one of two types, and you can kind of see what they look like here under the first example. You've got this inequality or this inequality. And then sometimes you'll see one that have the word and in between. So it's really just two inequalities in one. Now, there's two types, like we kind of just wrote up here. There's or inequalities, and then there's and inequalities. You have to be able to do three things for each type. You have to be able to write them, graph them, and solve them. So I'm going to do an example with you of all three types for ands and ors, and then you're going to practice on your own. Now, for or inequalities, and they give you an example of like a situation that would represent an or inequality. You must be younger than 12 or, and that kind of gives it away that this is a this or this. You must be younger than 12 or older than 65 to receive a discount at the movie theater. True story. Now, you needed to find a variable, so I'm thinking what needs to be younger than 12? Well, my age. I'm going to say A equals age. I need to write two inequalities, compound. So I'm going to write one about 12 and one about 65. So I set mine up like this, and then I go in and I decide what symbol or what inequality sign goes in between the variable and the number. So over here, let's see, my age needs to be younger than 12. So less than 12. Over here, my age needs to be older than 65. I've got to have an age greater than 65. And I'm going to put the word or in between. So if one of these is true, I'm going to get the discount. So that's writing a compound or inequality. You also will have to graph. So all I'm going to require is that you put the two numbers that you're talking about on the number line. Smaller numbers go on the left, bigger on the right. And really all you're doing is just graphing these two together on the same number line. So the open circle, closed circle thing isn't any different. These are both open circles. For this one, I want to shade to the left. So it'll be like that. And for the greater than 65, I want to shade to the right. Okay, I want you to make a note. For all of the or inequalities that we do, the graph, they always shade away from each other like this. So anytime we do or inequalities, you are always going to shade away from each other on the graph. Okay, so definitely make a note of that. Remember it. For the solving, that's the third part of this. And really, this isn't that bad. It's just kind of like two problems in one. So I'm going to solve this one for y, and then solve this one for y, and then put an or in between my two answers. So the first problem, I'm going to add 2. And I've got 3y is greater than 12. And then divide by 3. And y is greater than 4. I'm going to come over here and solve this one by dividing by -2. The thing that you have to remember when you're solving, doesn't matter whether it's compound or just one inequality, you have to remember when you flip the sign. And I have to flip the sign on this one because I divided both sides by a -2. So I'm going to change it to less than or equal to. And 0 divided by -2 is just 0. Okay, and if you bring the word or down, that makes it compound. So numbers that are bigger than 4 or less than or equal to 0 would be the answer to this compound inequality. Okay, so that's ors, and now we're going to look at and inequalities. Now, these have a little bit more going on to them, but writing them's really no different than the ors. So a situation that represents a compound and inequality is to pass algebra, your grade must be above a 60 and below 100. And we got the restrictions with the 100 because there's no extra credit, so you can't get over 100%. So if your grade's above 60 and below 100, and really I just think of it as between. If your grade is between 60 and 100, so I'm going to note that, then you're going to pass the class. And this is an and, so I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to define my variable. G is grade. Okay, so I'm going to write one inequality about the 60 and one about 100. Let's see, if my grade, it must be above, so greater than. And you can get exactly 60% and pass the class. Technically, you can get 59.5, but we won't go there. And below 100, or equal to it, that's a passing grade too. So I can get 100, it's rare, but less than or equal to 100. And I'm going to put the word and in there. So this is one way to write an and. There is a second way, and if you can see it, it's like there's an example of it here down with the solving problem. You don't actually have to write the word and. You can write this inequality using this idea that G just needs to be between these two numbers. So off to the side here, I could write it a second way. G is between 60 and 100. You just have to be careful with the signs, and they should always point the same way, kind of like these two down here. So your grade needs to be bigger than 60. So the mouth should open towards G. It can equal 60. And then it's less than or equal to 100. Okay, so make sure if you choose to write it like this between thing, the sign should point the same way. Never have it getting all weird where the signs go against each other. They should always be the same sign. Less than or equal to, greater than, whatever. Okay, so you could write it either way. To graph it, I'm only going to ask that you put the two numbers that we're talking about on the number line, 60 and 100, smaller on the left, bigger on the right. These are both closed circles this time, because it's got the or equal to. And if you remember this between thing, it's pretty easy on the graph. All the percentages between 60 and 100 are passing scores. Okay, so maybe make yourself a note on ands, just like we did on ors. Ors shade away from each other, and inequalities, they shade between or towards each other. Okay, so that's writing and graphing, and the last thing is you have to be able to solve an and inequality. And I would recognize this as an and, even though the word and isn't actually in it. But I would recognize this as and because they wrote it as that between thing we were talking about. Now, just like sometimes when we were doing equations we drew lines through the equal sign, I'm going to suggest to solve this that you draw lines through both of the inequality signs. The goal on these is to get x by itself in the middle. Okay, so if I look at what's going on in the middle here, I know if everything's being divided by something, I have to get rid of that first. So I'm going to multiply by 5 to cancel those out. The only difference is whatever you do in the middle, you have to do that on the right, and you have to do that on the left. So in 3 different places that has to happen. Let's see, that's 0 is less than 3 minus 2x in the middle, less than or equal to 15. The next step, I would move the 3, I'd subtract it, and make sure you do that in 3 different places. So negative 3 is less than negative 2x, which is less than or equal to 12. The last step, you need to divide by negative 2. And hopefully, in your mind, a little red flag waves. You just divided both sides by a negative, so you have to flip the sign. And here's the weird thing about these. If you flip one sign, you have to flip both of them. So, this is just going to be a fraction. And I'm kind of running out of room, but we'll squeeze it in. And I can just leave it 3/2. Negative over negative is positive. In the middle, I just have x. And over here, I've got -6. But like I said, you've got to flip both signs. So this is now a greater than, and this is a greater than or equal to. Okay, so I'll write my final answer up here so we can see it a little bit better. X is between 3/2, or 1.5, and -6.